Pilates is a common choice for those with lower back pain, but often people are making these two big mistakes that is preventing their back pain from getting better. So in today's video, we're going to explain what they are and also give you 4 steps that you can take to move forwards with your Pilates in a more effective way that's ultimately going to fix your back pain for good. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Michael Fatika, the lead osteopath and spine specialist here at Back in Shape, and we help people around the UK fix their back pain and sciatica and get back in shape for the long term. And in today's video, we're going to explore this relationship between Pilates for recovering from back pain and some of the details of spinal injury that can help you modify this great activity, this great exercise, this great practice, so that it's not interfering with that recovery process. So let's get into the first mistake. And this one is very, very simple. And it comes down to one of the big reasons that people do Pilates or think it's good for back health is that it improves your posture and spine alignment, doesn't it? Well, the big thing is that a lot of Pilates instructors, in fact, probably all of them or a significant majority, simply don't have spine alignment training. Although they were going to have a good idea of the posture, etc., head over the shoulders, over the rib cage, there's just not that detailed understanding about spine alignment. And therefore, and we see this borne out in some of the activities and exercises that are recommended. And when we think about a lot of cases, the overwhelming majority of lower back injuries affecting the L4-5 and L5-S1 segments, right down in the lower section of the lumbar spine, there are some important movements that creep into Pilates that actually are making the problem worse without really being aware of that. The biggest example of this is in the use of the pelvic tilt or pelvic tuck, whereby lying on our back, perhaps before a dead bug exercise, for example, we're going to be flattening our lumbar spine to the floor in order to initiate the core and then doing the movement. And this has huge disadvantages because as you initiate that posterior pelvic tuck, flattening the lumbar spine, you are putting the spine into an artificially flattened position. What's more, the overwhelming majority of patients in our experience and members have if anything, a reduction in the lumbar curve already in the standing position. And that, we would argue, feeds into one of the reasons why their discs are constantly being compressed and struggling to recover. It's also in more or less all cases, the mode of onset. It was forward bending, it was flattening the spine out that was the catalyst that injured the back. It was either spending hours and hours sat in the office every day or sat at home every day. The average adult spending 9 to 9.5 hours a day sitting, flattening the lumbar lordosis, or it was bending down to pick something up, rounding the lower back again. We don't need more of this movement. We discuss this in great detail in a dedicated episode on posterior pelvic tilt. And there'll be a link in the description so you can understand a little bit more there. But the point is, our core should be engaged with a neutral spine, which is something we're going to cover in the 4 steps later on in this video. But if we're learning the very basics of engaging our spine, hooking it to a movement such as the pelvic tuck or pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt, that is detrimental to our spine health and spinal alignment and spine integrity when we're lying down. When we go to stand up, we're going to continue to replicate that movement. We're going to instinctively flatten the lordosis. We're going to instinctively tuck our bum under and pelvic tilt. And therefore, that sets us up for failure and problems. And we see this time and time again in members and patients over the years. They've done the Pilates for many years, sometimes trying to get resolution, and they've built in these activities, these pelvic tilt movement hooks, and they really struggle to separate them out when they do things in the upright environment, let alone when they're lying down doing something like, for example, a dead bug. And the final part of this alignment puzzle is that so often online you're going to see a big obsession with everybody's got anterior pelvic tilt, everybody's pelvis is tilted forwards and we've got to tuck it back the other way. And this is so wrong. Most people don't have an anterior pelvic tilt, and most people aren't aware, this is practitioners speaking now, aren't aware of the inaccuracies of their physical exam. The amount of times patients come in and go, oh yeah, look at me from the side. Look, it really sticks in here. And it does. It looks like their bum sticks out and then there's a really deep curve. The problem is the spine doesn't start where the bum is. The bum is over the sacrum. The lumbar curve starts way higher up than a lot of people are aware. And it's like that long that you can see from the surface. You have no awareness whatsoever about the state of the lumbar curve. And therefore, flattening the pelvis to the ground is eliminating that curve. And if you don't know whether it is hyperlordotic, meaning too much curve, or hypolordotic, meaning too little curve, then you're just going to end up making things worse. And as I mentioned earlier, most people with long-standing lower back pain are much more likely to have a lack of lumbar curve or loss of lumbar curve than too much. And therefore, it only serves the pelvic tilt to make things even worse when we're doing it repetitively and therapeutically. So once we understand this important first mistake, we can move on to the second. And this is, I would argue, a much less significant mistake. It's more a fact of you're not necessarily making things worse, you're just not actually improving things. And that is the mistake of strengthening the core when it comes to Pilates. And what I mean by that is a lot of people get told to do Pilates because it strengthens your core. And there is credit to that, but it misses a fundamental aspect, which I'll touch on in a moment. The core is the core musculature that wraps around your trunk section, around your spine, and provides stability. And a lot of people, rightly so, struggle with that core engagement when they have lower back pain. It's a major factor in maintaining an inability to control the spine and protect it on a daily basis. So Pilates is a great tool, especially if we eliminate that first mistake, for helping us start to become aware of the core. The problem is it's going to build strength in those core muscles, but you end up with a weak spine. And that is because there is no load bearing, significant load bearing in Pilates. It's not got the aspect of load bearing that is relevant to our bodies. We have to lift shopping. If we've got kids, we've got to lift kids. If we've got grandkids, we've got to lift those. We've got various activities that we're going to be doing that involve carrying things. And it is reintroducing that load bearing activity, that resistance to load, to the spine and the core muscles working as one, that is essential. And unfortunately, people don't realize that their Pilates is building a strong core, perhaps to a degree, or it certainly is building an ability to activate and control the core and building a degree of strength, but it is resulting in a strong core and a weak spine. And as soon as you put that person back into the real world, being challenged with all sorts of load-bearing activities, they just realize they don't actually have the strong spine or the strong core in its completeness that they thought they had. Like with many things, it's understanding what your activity is doing for you. So if you've been told to do Pilates, then understand what it is doing and what part of the recovery, the essential recovery process, it fills, which it does provide significant improvement. It's gentle, it's easily accessible. Most people can do it. I prefer reformer Pilates over regular Pilates just because of the quirks of being able to use that machinery to help do more from a point of view of building a degree of core strength in the muscles. But also know what it doesn't do. It doesn't build the ability to resist axial load, which is something that needs to be got from somewhere if you're not getting it from Pilates. And that's kind of what we're going to start discussing in these next 4 steps. So thankfully, these mistakes aren't game changers for Pilates. And it's really as simple as making some of the modifications to now be aware of those mistakes. Quite often people don't know what they don't know. And whether you're a Pilates instructor watching this, hopefully it's going to really help you make some changes, especially if you're seeing clients and students that have back pain. It's going to help you modify some of those things. And equally, if you're a practitioner yourself, you're going to these classes and doing the Pilates and you've got lower back pain, you can make the modifications your end as well and maybe seek out some other things that are going to complement the Pilates that you're doing. But the very first and most important step is going to be understand what it is to have a neutral spine. And that means holding your spine in that neutral position. A great way of evaluating this is going to be standing against the wall with your heels, your bum, and your mid-back touching the wall. And you will feel there is a natural hollow that forms where the lower back sits. And that's normal. And we can test it to a degree by sliding, our fingers behind our lower back as we're standing in that position and checking they fit. But again, depending on all sorts of different morphological variations, some people have lots of fat tissue, muscle tissue in the lower back, some people have more in the buttocks, and that's going to create illusions here. It's not always a hard and fast test, but it can give us an indication. And that's the sort of the neutral position. So when you then go and lie down on the floor, you want to maintain that neutral position. And you might have your knees bent up and you want to maintain that natural curve in the lower back. You don't want to accentuate it because that is increasing the curve, which is a problem, okay? But you don't want to flatten it down either. And once you become aware of that neutral position, you can then start incorporating exercises such as the dead bug, for example, that are going to teach you to stabilize the spine in that neutral position as we move on to the next step. So now you understand what the neutral spine is. You can now understand when you're doing a pelvic tilt one way or the other. And you need to remove that. You need to eliminate that completely. So any pelvic tucks you might have done before you got into the dead bug, let's say, you're going to eliminate those. And just a quick break, there is a full link in the description to a detailed full tutorial on how to do the dead bug with variations, etc. So if that's an exercise which is common to Pilates that you might have done before and you're struggling with back pain, check that link out and you can follow along with that there and some of the modifications that we have to help you do it in a more back-friendly way. But it could also be the child's pose. It could be knee hugs and other stretchy components of the Pilates exercises that you're doing that need to be eliminated. There is no need for the overwhelming majority, 99% of us that have lower back injuries to be doing those sorts of exercises to flatten the lumbar spine out more. So to recap here, just before we get into step 3, We've got control over a neutral spine. We know what it is, we know where it is, and we know how to maintain it. We're doing our Pilates core exercises that are not doing any flattening of the lumbar spine. We've eliminated pelvic tilts, we've eliminated knee hugs and child's pose and those other things that flatten the lumbar spine. And now we can get on to somewhere else perhaps, or maybe in the Pilates studio if you've got the weights there, starting to add resistance-based exercises. Again, another resource for you guys in the description. We covered 5 core exercises. You might not necessarily think they're core exercises in the first instance, but this is things like the squat and the hip hinge movement, which are great exercises that we're all doing every single day, regardless of how bad or good our lower back is, that you can start to use with no weight, and then with resistance bands, and then with weights, and then maybe even with a barbell in the future in the gym or at home, depending on your equipment, to strengthen the core in its entirety. Understand that much of the Pilates exercises that are on the floor or on the reformer will really work to stimulate that core and help you in a safe environment engage the core. And we use things like the dead bugs and the marching bridges in the program for our members, and they're great when they're done correctly with a neutral spine in mind. But the only way to build strong core in that strong core in that full sense of the word, both the core muscles and the spine's ability to bear load, is to do those strength-based exercises. So you must add in a component of strength-based work to build axial load-bearing strength in your spine and in the core muscles. And I put it to you, you might be able to do a bunch of exercises on the core, on the floor, but then what happens when you put a 50 or a 30 or a 40 kilo load on your spine and do a squat? That one is going to challenge your core in a significant manner, in a complete manner, compared to many of the floor-based or non-load-bearing based exercises that you might be doing in Pilates. So make sure that's added into your program. Step 4 is really zooming out for the long term. You might be doing certain exercises to help you maintain control and flexibility in the core or around the core in your Pilates classes, and you might be doing some of that strengthening work that we've just discussed and progressing that slowly over the long term. And you can use those load-bearing exercises to build core strength for the long term, and you can utilize some of the great stuff that you're doing in your Pilates classes to build a degree of hip mobility. Hip mobility is really, really important when we've got a lower back injury. Your lower back injury is going to recover very, very slowly. It's going to remodel and rebuild strength as you're doing your strengthening work, but actually keeping those hips as they improve in strength from exercises like the squats and the hip hinges. Keeping those hips nice and mobile as well through some of the stuff that you're going to do in the Pilates class with a neutral spine will really help you compound the progress and go from a position where your back pain is maybe spiraling out of control and nothing's working to really starting to gather momentum, making progress, getting better and better with each passing week and each passing month. And as long as you do this in a more complete manner, a more holistic manner, you're going to have success. I just wanted to close out with some final thoughts. If you're a Pilates instructor and you've watched this far through the video, I hope you found it helpful. I hope you found it insightful and not too provocative in that regard. Pilates, if you're a student as well, is a great form of exercise. It's got many positive attributes, but it's a complete package. And when we're dealing with a specific problem, we have to acknowledge the nuances of that problem. And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, people will just say, oh, go and do Pilates, it's good for back pain. But the specific nuance needs to be applied in that Pilates for back pain to make sure that it is actually adhered to and you're doing things that are going to improve the overall health and well-being of your spine, considering the fact that maybe you have an injury at L4-5 or L5-S1 in that lower lumbar back with back pain, or maybe with some sciatica down the leg. And as long as we acknowledge that and also acknowledge some of the areas that Pilates can't do for us, we're going to make sure that we have the most complete and most robust and most effective rehabilitation strategy going forwards. So if you do have any questions on some of the steps that we've covered or the mistakes, then you can always post them in the comments below. I do hope you found this video or podcast episode helpful and insightful. And as always, we'll see you in the next video or podcast, wherever you're watching.